It's my pleasure and privilege to welcome back to the show Maria Mazziotti Gillan, poet, teacher, artist, and visionary founder of the renowned Poetry Center at the Passaic Community College in Patterson, New Jersey. And she's joining me by phone today from Patterson to discuss her new book, When the Stars Were Still Visible. Hello, Maria.
Hi, Sharon.
How are you? Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you for asking me again.
Oh,
Love your show.
Oh, thank you. I'm going to read your bio. Maria Mazziotti Gillan, American Book Award recipient for All That Lies Between Us, Guernica Editions, and author of 24 books, founded the Poetry Center in Patterson, New Jersey, is editor of the Patterson Literary Review, and is professor emerita of English and Creative Writing at Binghamton University, SUNY. Her newest poetry collection is When the Stars Were Still Visible, Stephen E. Austin University Press, 2021. Other recent publications include What Blooms in Winter, NYQ 2016, and the poetry and photography collaboration with Mark Hilleringhouse, Patterson Light and Shadow, Serving House Books, 2017. Would you open the show, Maria, by reading the titular poem of the collection, When the Stars Were Still Visible?
Thank you. I'd be glad to.
Thank you.
When the stars were still visible. In the poem photo, I am on the back steps of the six-family tenement on Fifth Avenue in Patterson, where I was born. I'm squinting into the sun, my nose wrinkled, my eyes closed against the glare. I'm 2 years old, my hair a curly cap on my head. It looks blonde, though I know it couldn't have been, and wonder if I'm remembering my daughter at 2 sitting in a little rocking chair on the front porch on Oak Street in Kansas City. Her hair all blonde ringlets. Strange how memory is like fragments of a puzzle. Remember the green blackout shades in our apartment in Patterson in 1944. Remember my father dressed as a devil for a costume party at the Società Celentana on Butler Street. Remember the silver ball Guillermo made from foil inside Camel Silk cigarettes he smoked that stained his fingers yellow. So many memories swirl like bits of color in a kaleidoscope, and so impossible to explain. Remember 17th Street with Mrs. Generic Jelly, who always fainted when she got upset, and the old man who ran the candy store that was so filthy no one bought anything there, and the big garage in Janelli's backyard where we put on plays until something happened, I don't know what. Something to do with playing doctor behind our improvised curtains. And then we weren't allowed to play there anymore. Remember Guillermo's garden with tomatoes and zucchini and corn, and a vacant lot next door that seemed so huge you'd think we had all of New Jersey to play in. Until I see it years later covered with asphalt and garages. And I realized the entire block, my world until I was 11, wasn't that big, and certainly a lot small, and now so ugly. Remember Patterson, when the stars were still visible in the sky, and I didn't know 17th Street was in a city. Remember the sweet smell of marigolds and daisies in the vacant lot, and our house full of food and laughter, our family together under the kitchen light, the company of honorary aunts and uncles. Outside, our friends gathered to play stickball in the street, hours to fill with games and books and dreaming. How lucky I was, how lucky. Patterson glowing and sparkling like a silver ball in my hand.
Thank you, Maria. That was Maria Gillan reading from her book, When the Stars Were Still Visible, of the poem of the same name. And Maria, I love the way you put your daughter, you remember your hair as being blonde, and then your daughter, maybe it was your daughter's hair. So I love those those confluence of memory, and how the entire poem, it's so beautiful to open the volume because it opens it like Proust's Madeline. You know, we just get you just catapult us back into the past with your voice that's obviously a mature voice and in the present. And
thanks. I always loved Proust, and I love that moment when he tastes the Madeline and is suddenly 4 years old again. And I think that's where memory works, that it's a smell or a sound or something that triggers that movement into the past where we remember things in such great detail. The biggest fun for me in writing poetry is to find those little details, things I thought I had forgotten, that come back to me when I'm writing a poem. It's a wonderful feeling, and it's a way that for me to get into the poem and to find what it is that I need to say. When I didn't know 17th Street was a city, and I didn't know it. I didn't understand that. I thought I was in the country.
I love when you write that, when I didn't know 17th Street was in a city, that you remember that. That says it all. It's a remarkable part of the poem. And Maria, your Patterson childhood, is a recurring theme in your books, and for me it takes on almost mythic proportions. Can you talk about that? Do you agree with me that it is a recurring theme in your books?
Oh, definitely. I keep going back to it. I guess because I was ashamed of it when I was a kid. Not when I was this age, that young. I don't think I understood enough or had been out in the world enough to understand, to be ashamed. The shame perhaps came later. But it took me a long time to realize how lucky I was. I think sometimes I'll have a student and they'll talk about their lives, and very often it makes me realize how really fortunate I was in the kind of parents I had, in the way they loved us, in the way they didn't spoil us, but they really gave us everything they could. And while they didn't have money to give us much in the way of money, they gave us a whole bunch of values that have served me in very good stead in my life. And for me, that childhood in Patterson became kind of symbolic of the way that background led me to the rest of my life and the things that I did in my life. It's almost as though they were getting me prepared for that, although they didn't know that or didn't think that when they were doing it. They were just being themselves and honoring the things they honored. My mother loved cooking, loved food, loved her family, worked really hard, showed by example what a good life was like. And my father was a very outgoing community activist, very politically involved, very politically committed, very interested in the things you can do to change the world and make it a better place. And that was kind of the flag he flew under, that you were supposed to live your life in such a way that you made changes in the world around you. So that really was motivated me to do a lot of things, like starting the Poetry Center, like other things that I've done in my life, which, coming from where I came from, you wouldn't have said I think I would have done any of those things. But
your childhood was a perfect recipe for that unfolded, the recipe unfolded to you.
Right. It really, really was. And you wouldn't think so. I mean, you think, oh, God, she's poor, and she didn't speak English when she went to school, and she's probably going to have 10 children by the time she's 16 or something. And that wasn't what my life was at all. And my parents really encouraged me in everything I wanted to do, even when I thought that I was a little insane for the things that I wanted to do.
Maria,
they were very encouraging.
Would you read Looking Back, I See Myself in Third Grade on page 14?
Sure.
Thank you.
Looking back, I see myself in third grade, dreamy child, shy, a child afraid of everything, always afraid I'd make a mistake, speaking Italian instead of English, my long, thin face, my sausage curls, my huge dark eyes. I tried to hide by folding my hands neatly on my desk, by looking down at the names carved on its surface by generations of other children. Third grade, where teachers began to read poems and stories to us, where I fell in love with the sound of English read aloud, me in my neatly ironed hand-me-down dresses, me with my olive-toned skin listening to Longfellow or John Greenleaf Whittier or Edgar Arlington Robinson, read by the teacher in unaccented English, the language so beautiful, their poems carrying me away from the dusty, time-worn classrooms to a place where words could sing in my head. At the end of each day, I could go home to a place where I could forget to be afraid. I was happy to go back to my mother's kitchen where I could eat homemade bread fresh out of the oven, home to the aroma of herbs, basil and rosemary and oregano walking through the house and greeting me like a kiss each day at the door.
That's
and those teachers in third grade who started to read to us, read aloud to us, read stories and poems, were so influential in my life. And I think to myself, I should have written them all notes to thank them. Of course I didn't, but I should have. And I hope that wherever they are, that I'm grateful for what they gave me, for showing me that there was a door into a place where I could learn how to sing in the same way that these poets sang.
That's so beautiful, Maria.
It was a very important thing for me.
Third grade is a very important grade. And I remember, too, the world sort of opened up. But I love the way you say the contrast of the dusty classrooms and the library. Sort of everything bursts into life in the library.
Oh, it does, completely. For me, the library was really a salvation. I'd walk up to the library, and Christine was a librarian, and I started at A, and I worked my way around in the children's section. And then at one point when I was about 11 or 12, maybe 11, she said, okay, you can go in the adult section now. And I did the same thing there. I started at A, and I worked my way around, and I didn't know what was good literature, what was not good. I didn't know what was well-written or what wasn't. But after all that reading, the language became a part of my body. And I began to be able to tell, well, this is good writing and this is not good writing.
Isn't that amazing?
Without anybody teaching me. So in a way, that library was my education, as well as the teachers at PS18 who took the time to read literature aloud to us so we could hear what the language sounded like. We could hear what the language sounded like when it was spoken by somebody who was well-educated and who understood the music of language.
Maria, would you read My Father's Red Car on page 44?
Oh, sure.
Thank you.
Glad to. When I think of you, I see you first in your little red car, the one you bought secondhand, the one Mom hated because she thought it was too flashy and she didn't want to be noticed. She never climbed in or out of that car without complaining about the color, but you were happy with it. You drove it until you were 86. When the police reported to my brother, the doctor, that you drove the car 5 miles per hour and you were going to cause an accident, so you had to give it up. Until then, you drove to play cards with your friends in the afternoon, or to visit your sister in Patterson, or to work in the Italian societies, or to do taxes for the other immigrants. Climbed out of that sporty car, even when you had to use a walker. Nothing stops you. I wish I had told you before you died at 92 how much your courage, your joy in life meant to me, how much it taught me about how to live. My 19-year-old grandson took me to buy a new car last month. It's just as flashy and cherry red as the car you drove all those years ago. I know I'm about 25 years too old for this car. Did you know that, too, about yours? But I love tooling around in it. I love that my grandson shows it for me, that every time I get into it, I think of you.
That's Maria Mazziotti Gillan reading My Father's Red Car. What a love letter to your father that you wrote to him, Maria. It's really, really beautiful. And you capture the exuberance of him in your poem. And could you...
Well, he had such a joie de vivre, and he was partially paralyzed. He drove that car. He'd walk to the car with a walker. Then he'd get in the car, and then he'd use the walker to get out of the car, and he'd go everywhere.
That's amazing.
He had a lot of courage, and considering he really didn't speak English very well, he had a very strong accent, even years after he lived in the United States. He always said, I can't get my tongue around English. But he loved America with a passion. He thought it was the greatest country in the world. He loved Italy because he was born there and because it was the place where he lived until he was 16. But he loved America for its ideals, for what he thought it promised people, that the American dream was real for my father.
And for the cars.
In many ways, the American dream slammed in my father's face.
Oh, yes.
But he never gave up on it.
Well, it's a wonderful poem, and I didn't know that about your father having a walker and then going to his red car. Could you tell us a little?
Oh, yeah, he's got this walker, and he gets it. My mother was horrified. My mother wore very tan colors. She didn't want anybody to notice her. And there my father brings home this red car. She wanted to kill him.
That's great. There's a contrast between the first poem, Looking Back, I See Myself in third grade, where you're afraid of everything and your shyness and your fear. And then you write this poem, My Father's Red Car. Can you talk a little bit about the contrast between those two?
I spent a long time being afraid of everything. I was very shy. First of all, I didn't speak English when I went to school. So I was always afraid that I was speaking Italian instead of English. The Italian word would come out of my mouth. I felt extremely foreign, extremely out of it. I was very naive. I was very, in many ways, very sheltered. And I just was afraid of the teachers and afraid of everything. I was grateful for the reading of the poems aloud, but mostly I was really scared of everybody and everything. And my father was afraid of nothing. Wow. And he should have been afraid, but he wasn't. And so that taught me something about a way to live. And I love his red car was kind of flaunting it in the face of everything. Everybody who said he couldn't make it, that he was too weak to drive the car, that all the naysayers in the world, he just drove that car like a red flag. And I feel that in a way, when I drove that red car when I was quite old, that was another way of waving a red flag and saying, I might look like I can't walk very well and I'm using a cane and all the rest of it, but nothing breaks my spirit. And as long as I have poetry and art and students and people I love, then nobody can take that away from me. So I like driving around in a little red car.
Oh, I
think of him.
I love my mother-in-law's red Dodge, but yeah, I love the fact that you followed in his footsteps, and all of your achievements, the Patterson Center, your poems, your books. That's sort of like the red flag. It's sort of like the red car.
Yeah, it is. It really is. It's part of it. And I developed a kind of confidence. Once I started doing things, I would get an idea. Like I decided that I was going to start this poetry center in Patterson. Everybody said, that's insane. Nobody's going to come to a poetry center in Patterson. And I said, well, you haven't met me. If I decide I'm doing something, just get out of my way. And it's been very successful. Right before the pandemic, we had the 40th anniversary celebration, which was so wonderful. About 300 people came from all over to celebrate the Poetry Center. We had the most wonderful day. It was just so heartwarming to realize that something that was an idea of mine, I turned into a poetry center that's known not only all over the country, but in different places in the world as well.
Well, it's so thrilling.
Been a very big deal for me.
And you made it a big deal for everybody. I mean, you created that. It's a very important.
I wanted to make it also a place where people could come to take workshops with famous poets, where poets could meet one another, where people could be encouraged to follow their dreams of writing or of being an artist. And I will say, my latest book is dedicated to Linda Hillinghouse, who's part of the Painting Poets Camp. The Painting Poets Camp is Linda and I. We get together every Sunday and we paint. And Linda was painting long before I was. I was painting when I was young, but it wasn't until I went to do a reading tour with Diane DePrima in San Francisco, and we were leaving San Francisco to go to Santa Cruz, and she said, we're going in to buy paints. And I thought she was buying them for herself. And she said, no, these are for you. And I nearly had a heart attack. So I said, here's this famous poet. I'm going to be reading with her in Santa Cruz. We're going to go to a hotel in Santa Cruz, and then we're going to do the reading. And how can I possibly paint? But we get there, and she said, well, you go in your room, I'll go in mine, and we'll paint. And I got inside the room, and I got terrified. A little girl came back. That little girl always comes running back, the little girl from third grade.
Sure.
And I got really scared, and I'm looking out the window, and there's roses growing outside the window. And I think, well, I'll paint those roses, and I can't do it. I keep ripping up the pages. And then I thought, stop right this minute, and remember what you tell your students, that it doesn't have to be anybody else's poem. It just has to be yours. And it doesn't have to be anybody else's rose. It just has to be yours.
Oh, wow.
And that's when I really felt free to be able to paint what I saw in my imagination. And I've been painting ever since, and I'm having a wonderful time. I've had lots of paintings. I've had several shows. I have a show coming up in September, and I've sold a lot of paintings, and it makes me extremely happy. I hope Diane's happy. She died a few years ago, but I hope she knows how important she was to me. And in a lot of ways, that art helped me to deal with COVID. It helped me deal with being isolated and not being able to do the things that I had been doing. So I always say to everybody, just try. You don't know. I can't draw a straight line.
But
I'm very much an untrained artist, a self-trained artist. I've had such a wonderful time, and I think that what the paintings are a kind of joy that comes across.
Well, it does.
A kind of an effervescence of spirit that comes across. They seem alive to me, and they all seem very alive and very happy in a way, or pensive or whatever. But and I love when I sell a painting and then a person sends me a picture of the painting in their kitchen.
Oh, that's great.
Or in their study. It's such a wonderful feeling.
Well, they're very exuberant. I just want to tell our listeners that if you go to, you can see Maria's artwork on her website, Maria Mazziotti Gillan. That's Maria, Mazziotti Gillan, .com. And then you can see her gallery of these incredibly exuberant, really fabulous colors and as you said, life. And they're quite extraordinary. And you say that your art has helped save your life in a lot of ways, Maria.
Well, it has. I think both my art and my poetry have helped to save my life. Excuse me, I have allergies. And but the art is a whole other part of my brain that I'm using. A very different part of my brain that I'm using when I'm writing poetry.
Mm-hmm.
And the mood in the poems is very often pensive and full of memory and full of a sense of time going by. And I think the mood in the poems is always like this very happy little girl takes over.
Mm-hmm.
And so I love that. I love that there's another person inside me who takes over when I'm painting.
Oh,
and a different person takes over. I think the old lady who lives in my belly takes over when I'm writing poems.
Joining us now from Manhattan, as she did during our last show, Maria, is our Poet-At-Large Pamela Manché Pearce to share her insights and revelations about poetry and art. Pamela is a New Jersey poet, born and raised, and text written by Pamela, who's a Pushcart Prize-nominated poet, has been included in a conceptual installation, Landscape of Thoughts, at Le Jardin Victor in Coulanges-sur-Yonne, in France. Hello, Pamela.
Hello, Sharon. Hello, Maria.
Hi, Pamela. Good to hear you again.
Well, I'm having such a wonderful time. The whole show is moving so fast because I'm enjoying myself. And just as an aside, I have to throw in that every car I have ever owned has been red.
Oh,
so I know that I'm in good company with you, Maria, and your mother-in-law, Sharon. So I'm so happy to be here once again.
Well, you know what's interesting is that it's like isn't there a red hat club or something where older women wear this red hat? So I think this is the red car club.
Well, there you go. We're starting a new chapter, which is the new red car club. I love it. So it's a wonderful way for me to begin my time with you both today. I am continuing my series as Poet at Large, and I've titled it Cross-Pollination because I've begun several sessions back to explore the connections between poetry and other arts and other artists, and I find that there is really a cross-pollination that happens all the time. When I looked at your book jacket, Maria, When the Stars Were Still Visible, I immediately thought of Marc Chagall, and I began to do some research about him for this show. Well, I hope that's okay. I'm sure you would. And they both have this magical, dreamy, fantasy quality. Chagall has been called the poet with the wings of a painter. And the word poetry and poems and poet are inextricably connected to him over and over again. His work is described as poetic. He had an exhibit in London not so many years ago that was called The Poetry of Color, Poems in Colors. He was friends of poets. He and Apollinaire were very close, and he did a wonderful painting, an homage to Apollinaire. He did another one called, very famous painting of his called The Poet Reading, and this was dedicated to Mazin, who was a Russian poet who would come and sit in Chagall's studio in Paris when he was very young and very poor and working all night, and Mazin would sit there with him, and they would drink tea, and Chagall would paint, and Mazin would read poetry, and they had a wonderful, wonderful relationship, and Chagall honored him with this very famous painting called The Poet Reading. We know a lot about Chagall, but not very many people know that he actually wrote poems, and I was able to find some of them. Many of them
wonderful.
Isn't that wonderful? And
Amazing.
I think you'll like what I chose. It's very distinctly different and very interesting. And while he was growing up in the shtetl in Russia, he was born in 1887, he absorbed what was going on around him, and many of these images of Jewish life and Jewish traditions in his environs. Maria's talking about her childhood too, and they really stuck with him. And these come out over and over again in his art. He made his way to Paris to study and become an artist in full. And he lived in New York at some point. He is considered a pioneer of modernism. a master of form of color, and a major artist a major Jewish artist. He and Picasso were friends, and Picasso, who I imagine is not, I have a feeling, was not so generous with his compliments, said that when Matisse dies, Chagall will be the only painter left who understands what color really is.
Mm.
That's pretty
Beautiful.
good. So
I'm sure Picasso was not so generous with his comments.
No, well, we just know that, right?
We a wonderful comment.
I think that was a big deal. I think it was a big deal. So when we look at Chagall's work that most of us, including myself, are most familiar with, he's so known for these dreamscapes, lovers and flowers and flights of imagination, magical, charming environments, and lots of tenderness. And I found this poem. It's an excerpt of a poem of his called "Mine Alone is the Country in My Soul," and it's translated by Sophie Schulman. So let me read this excerpt. Mine alone is the country in my soul. I enter there without a passport, as if it is my home. It sees my sadness and my solitude. It lulls me to sleep and covers me with a heavy perfume. In me, gardens bloom. The flowers are my creations. The streets belong to me, but there are no houses. They were destroyed in their infancy. The inhabitants roam the air in search of a home. They dwell in my soul. For this reason I smile when my sun barely shines, or cry like a light rain in the night. There was a time when I had two heads. There was a time when these two faces covered themselves in an amorous dew and dissolved into the perfume of a rose.
Mm.
So that's one aspect
beautiful.
of Chagall, which is one that we all I feel we're more familiar with. But things got very dark for him. He and his wife barely escaped France during World War II, and came to the United States. And then later on, he looked back. His palate darkens, and he looks back on everything that had happened in the Holocaust, and he was very incensed that American artists did not do more for Jewish artists who were killed by the Nazis. And he writes a poem. I've only been able to find two excerpts of it. I don't know the translators, but I want you to hear this. It's called For the Slaughtered Artists, 1950. I see them trudging alone in rags, barefoot on mute roads. The brothers of Israel's Pizarro and Modigliani, our brothers, pulled with ropes by the sons of Dürer, Connacht, and Holbein to death in the crematoria. I see the fire, the smoke and the gas rising to the blue cloud, turning it black. I see the torn-out hair, the pulled-out teeth.
Oh.
They overwhelm me with my rabid palate. I stand in the desert before heaps of boots, clothing, ash, and dung, and mumble my Kaddish. And as I stand for my paintings, the painted David descends to me, harp in hand. He wants to help me weep and recite the chapters of Psalms. So,
wow, that's incredible.
And this was the palette darkens. He begins to paint things with scenes of crucifixions, the apocalypse in lilac. Very, very powerful and very, very different work. So I was excited to see these two different sides of Chagall emerge, not only in his visual art, but in his poetry.
Thank you for bringing that to us, Pamela. It's amazing.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I also want to say, bringing Maria's art back with Chagall, and you had made a comment, Pamela, about Maria's art, how confident it is.
Yes.
I think that's true, and exuberant and tremendously confident.
It is very confident, and I actually wrote down in my notes, I don't have to be anyone else's, and I left space. It just has to be mine.
It's
and
beautiful.
Maria, I'm going to put that over my desk.
Right.
I'm going to put that quote over my desk because it pertains to anything. It doesn't have to, it really has, and I think your work really is confident is exactly the right word, Sharon. Thank you for reminding me of that. And you do that, Maria, and you do that for all of us. So thank you so much.
And thank you, Pamela, for that.
Thank you. That's a wonderful thing to hear.
It's true.
My pleasure. And now I'm going to relax and listen to the rest of the show. Okay.
Thank you,
Have
Pamela
fun.
Manché Pearce.
That was wonderful. I'm going to go look up more of Chagall's poems.
Excellent. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye, Pamela. Thanks so much.
Bye, honey.
And Maria, it's what you said about art, about starting a project that you're afraid of. The way you describe that, it's for anything, and it's a great thing for all the poets who are listening to us, or writers, or artists, or anybody who wants to attempt anything creative to trust themselves.
Well, there is an old lady who lives in our belly, or if you're a man, an old man who lives in your belly, and I think that figure knows more than anything else, and that if we trust that voice inside us, a kind of instinctive voice, we could do anything. The problems poets and artists run into is when they get afraid, and they're afraid to take a chance, or they're afraid that what they're doing is not sophisticated enough or not acceptable enough to literary critics and scholars. I think you have to let go of all of that and say, this is my work, and I am doing it, and I am happy to be doing it, and I am free to do it, and it doesn't matter to me what anybody says about it. And if you can get to that point, I think you can really write your greatest work and your greatest poems and your greatest paintings.
Thanks, Maria. That's very, very good advice. I want to talk a little bit about the center. You mentioned about the 40th anniversary of the center's founding, and I was struck by your poem, the first poem about when the stars were visible, and you talked about Patterson glowing and sparkling like a silver ball in my hands, and I feel that you've done that with the center at Patterson, that you've created this beautiful object that's living and invigorating Patterson. And you've brought diversity to the center also. Can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, when I studied at the center a couple of years ago, I took a course with Patricia Smith and Martina Spada, for example.
They're both wonderful, and I've been so happy because American poetry is not all one thing, and I've been very happy to present poets of color who write from the heart. I really made up my mind that I was not going to present poets who are writing for 5 white guys from Harvard. I wanted people who spoke for people, all sorts of people, all colors of people, all races of people. And I've made a point to invite those people to the center. So I've had probably every famous poet in the country at the center, or every famous poet whose work I liked. I figured I started it, I get to choose. So I've had Philip Levine, and I've had Stanley Kunitz, and Patricia Smith, and Martina Spada, and all sorts of people come to read. And it's been wonderful. It has been such a joy for me to see people come together, to see how popular our workshops are. Oh, yeah. That people come from very far distances to take their workshops at the Poetry Center, and they're 10 o'clock on a Saturday morning. So if you have to drive 3 hours to get there, you really want to be there. Right. And they've been wonderful. And then the poets read in the afternoon. And then we have an open reading always. And I still remember that Stanley Kunitz came, and he's a major American poet, and he was about 96 at the time, and he read, and then he signed books for about 2 hours, wow. And then he came in and sat in the open reading, and he listened, and I thought, what a wonderful, generous spirit. That's what a poet really should be, not a mean, jealous person, but one who was willing to celebrate other poets. And I think the Poetry Center has celebrated other poets. We've had the Patterson Book Award, Patterson Poetry Prize. We have the Prize for Books for Young People. We have the Allen Ginsberg Awards. We have the journalist Patterson Literary Review. We have the New Jersey Poetry Calendar. I've tried to make it as alive a place as I could, and a place that would reach as many people as possible. Now we have on our YouTube channel, a lot of the readings are uploaded to the YouTube channel.
Great.
So even people like William Stafford, who read in 1986,
wow.
I actually was shocked to see how young I looked at 46. He read in 1986, and it was wonderful to see him again reading.
Fantastic.
And it brought back to me those moments of your reading. So I hope that what I've done is created a very special place, not a place for 5 academics, but a place for people to come.
A living
from
legacy.
All walks of life.
It's funny. I was just thinking about that because the building itself is so beautiful, where the center is housed in Patterson.
Yeah, the Hamilton Club. And that was a very exclusive club for rich businessmen.
Very beautiful wood.
And so they gave it to us to use as a cultural center. And they would not have let me in because I was a female and Italian for many years. Then later on, they started letting in, one black person, one woman, that kind of thing. But it was a very select gentleman's club. And,
how ironic, how great.
So I love that all people from all over, from all backgrounds, are coming to the Hamilton Club now to celebrate poetry and to read poetry and listen to it.
What a story.
I love that. It's a beautiful building.
Oh, it's gorgeous. It reminds me of the library that I went to as a child because I'm getting up there, and this library was the main branch in Queens, and it was wood, lots of paneling and paintings, and then it was demolished for this box that they put up, and so going into the center reminds me of that lush environment that I knew as a child.
The Patterson Public Library is like that too. And luckily, they haven't demolished it.
Oh, that's great.
But it's very elegant, wonderful marble staircase. It's really quite wonderful. And I think all of us who had the opportunity to have a library like that when we were children. We're so fortunate because without saying it, it was teaching us about architecture, about beauty, about surrounding yourself with beauty and art. And it didn't have to say it; it just was. And I read in the library that's now like a box. And believe me, I wish I had read in the other version.
Yeah, Maria, would you read? We want to hear a couple of more poems, and the time is going so fast. Would you read This Morning on the Terrace, page 109?
Sure.
Thank you.
Yep. I have my pages all marked here so that I won't mess up and not be able to find them. This morning on the terrace at Albadona, the morning dove greets me with his repetitive cry. I look out over the olive trees planted in neat rows leading down to the Ionian Sea, spread out before me like an abstract painting. It is amazing in its changing colors, turquoise, green, deep blue, lavender. The Calabrians tell me the colors change because of the currents. And although I've been to museums all over the world, I have never seen anything quite like this. It could be a sea of silk, like those scarves artists create. The sweet-smelling air, the gentle breeze that lifts my hair, the stillness broken only by the cries of birds. I love that moment.
It's a beautiful
And I thought
poem.
it was very interesting that the Italians from Calabria said it was the currents that caused all the colors to change.
I love it. It could be a sea of silk like those scarves artists create, and that all those beautiful colors. And your poem reminds me of your your art. Also, it's I was very struck by that. We're running out of time, but I know you took a trip to Calabria. Was it in 2019?
Yes, I was asked by the University of Calabria to teach a workshop, a writing workshop intensive in Calabria. It was so beautiful. It was such a wonderful experience. I cannot tell you how wonderful it was. And we were set to do another session of it in 2020, but the pandemic hit, so we couldn't do it. So now we're trying to aim for 2022 or 2023 in September to see whether we can do that. It was just amazing, and it wasn't on the campus of the university. It was in a couple of places. One was Murano, Calabria, and one was Albadona. And I would sit on the terrace of this little house they gave me, and I'd look out and I could see the Ionian Sea. It was so beautiful. And this experience in Calabria was so amazing for me. And the poets who attended, the people who attended, some had never written poetry before, and some had books of poetry. They did such an amazing job, but we ended up doing a book of poetry and photography of Calabria that came out from, I'm sorry, I've forgotten the name of the publisher. Terrible. Anyway, he would be really annoyed at me, but anyway.
I'm looking for it now.
So they did a book of Mark Hillinghouse's photographs and my and poems by me and by the other participants. It was really incredible.
Sounds beautiful. Where should people go to your listeners go to your website to find if they're interested in your books, where they can find out more information about them? Yes, they can
go to the website. They're available on Amazon, of course. And they're available on Barnes & Noble and small presses distributor. The last one is available directly from the press, but it's easier in a way. I mean, I shouldn't really say that, I guess. But these big suppliers of books are very easy to order a book from.
Right.
So, but go to your local bookstore and ask them to order it and order it for you, because I'm really worried that little bookstores are going out of business.
Right.
I'm very grateful to Barnes & Noble and to Amazon for selling my books and for filling orders, but I also worry about the small bookstores. And so if you have a small bookstore in your community, please support it.
Thank you, Maria. We're going to end the show so fast, but would you read Claiming My True Name to end the show?
Sure. It took me a long time to do this. It took me years
to claim your name, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
So many years layered in shame. So many years trying to hide my immigrant self and my true name. Looking back, I know what I wanted. I knew what I wanted when I saw you, love, that first time at your friend's house. You with your blonde, boyish looks, your handsome face, your wide gray eyes, your big white colonial house, your educated American parents. Say, I imagine that by marrying you, I could erase all those Z's and T's in my name. Change it all like an old coat I could give away, and put on instead what I thought was the sleek Americanness of your name. And I would be able to erase my ethnic face, my frizzy hair. I wanted to deny the foreign girl I was, one who didn't speak English when I went to school, deny my Italian parents and the cold water flat, leave them all behind, and slide right into the light of America that I was sure I wanted. Years later, I realized I had traded away everything that shaped me, traded away the song that beat in my blood, the aroma of ethnic food I loved, and only then, staring into a void as big as the Grand Canyon, did I claim my true name, brass all those Z's and T's around me, and force people to use my true name, even when they stumble over it, and they have to ask, is that the way you pronounce your name? And I pronounce it for them, waving in the air like a banner, proud of my Italian self, proud of all the things that mark me as unique, as different, a foreign creature who can at last claim my own true name.
And that is poet Maria Mazziotti Gillan, claiming my true name. Maria, it's been a wonderful, delightful show. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you taking the time to be on the show. Thank you so much.
I love it. It's a wonderful show. And could you send me a link so I can share it on my blog?
Absolutely. It's going to be on podcast, and then I will let you know. And if listeners are interested in getting announcements of my show, you can go to my website, SharonIsraelPoet.com, click on Planet Poet, and subscribe. Thank you so much, and thank you to Pamela Manché Pearce, Poet-At-Large. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Sharon.
Thank
You're
you.
wonderful.
Thank you so much, Maria.